This episode is brought to you by Education Perfect, a complete teaching and learning toolkit built to support Canadian classrooms. Education Perfect empowers educators to track progress, personalize learning, and support purposeful practice. It's easy to use, flexible, and designed to help Canadian teachers amplify their impact in the classroom. See for yourself and book a free demo today at educationperfect.com.
What that says to me, Jason, is that as a leader, you have a tremendous responsibility. One, to make sure that as a superintendent, as a director, you have to do your very best to develop a leadership program within your organization so that you have the very best principals and vice principals leading those schools so that they can create a culture with their teaching and support staff in that school to ensure that the very best product is on that student's desk each and every day.
Welcome to the Education Matters podcast. Today I want you to consider, what does it look like when a school system is led by someone who brings not only clarity and commitment, but demonstrates vulnerability too? David DeSantis is the Director of Education for the Algonquin and Lakeshore Catholic District School Board in Ontario. He served in that role since 2019 after more than 30 years in Catholic education. Over that time, he's held nearly every role you can name: department head, principal, superintendent, working across student success, safe schools, and leadership. And through it all, he stayed rooted in a simple belief that public education is essential because it offers equity of opportunity and the chance for every student to realize their full potential. But David didn't follow the typical path into education. In fact, it wasn't the plan at all. He started in commerce, considered a life in music, and nearly walked away from the classroom in his early years. It's a winding journey marked by doubt, mentorship, and meaning that makes his leadership so human and so resonant today. What made this conversation stand out for me is how openly David reflects on his journey and leadership style. He speaks candidly about the early struggles of teaching and the mentors who helped him stay in the profession. He shares why he sees elementary education as one of the most overlooked yet critical parts of our system. He speaks with real emotion about the trust of a child and the sacred responsibility that comes with it. Unlike most of my guests, I haven't known David for a very long time, but in every way, he's the kind of leader I want others to hear from and learn from. In our conversation, we also dig into the structural challenges facing Ontario schools, the mental health crisis, the funding constraints, and the growing pressure on educators. David also gives us some examples of successful district initiatives that he's been part of, from his district's Reaching Every Reader initiative and his focus on growing the next generation of system leaders. So without further ado, here is my conversation with David DeSantis. David DeSantis, welcome to the Education Matters podcast. Where does this podcast find you today?
Thank you. It finds me in Napanee, Ontario, which is where our board office is situated.
For those that are not familiar, it's a beautiful place. Let's say approximately right between Toronto and Ottawa. Beautiful area.
Yeah, and even more specifically in between Belleville and Kingston.
I imagine a lot of good hockey players out that way.
Phenomenal. Bobby Hall is one of them. Right, Wayne Cashman. There's a whole host of NHL players and WHA players that came from this area.
That's awesome. Well, David, I would have given you a proper intro at this stage, but can you update the audience as to what you're currently up to, what your role is right now?
Yeah, I'm the Director of Education for the Algonquin and Lakeshore Catholic District School Board. Our board covers 16,000 square kilometers. We're considered a mid to small board in terms of size in the province of Ontario. We have over 12,000 students, 33 elementary schools, 5 secondary schools, and 5 alternative education sites.
Awesome. So, David, we always begin the podcast with getting a bit of a background on the guests. So, can you tell me where and when did you grow up?
I grew up in Steeltown, Hamilton, Ontario.
Hmm.
Uh, Born in an Italian family. That old-fashioned Eurocentric upbringing by very strict Italian immigrant parents. Dad worked at Stelco for over 35 years, and my mom,
Hmm.
part-time when we were younger, took care of us, and then went to work full-time at St. Joe's Hospital in Hamilton. And they're
Hmm.
still at the matrimonial home to this day. They bought it in 1965. I was born in 1967.
That's incredible. Were they born here or did they immigrate?
They, like most Canadians, immigrated
Hmm.
from Italy. They actually grew up in the province of Abruzzese.
Oh, I
Abruzzi,
didn't I didn't know that. So we're paisani because my
yeah,
mother's
yeah.
Abruzzo says it. What part of the province?
Uh, they're a small little town called. My dad grew up in Goriano Siculi, and my mom in the adjacent town called Galliano
Hmm.
Siculi. And I would say it's about an hour away from Sulmona, which is kind of a big city in province of Abruzzi. But that's where I think the families met. And then my dad came over for work, and my mom came over to finish off school, and she went to get her grade 12 diploma. But during that era, as you can imagine, women were pressured to get married young and have a family. But she was so bright she could have easily gone to university. But when you're growing up in that dynamic of a working class family, you have certain priorities and certain
Hmm.
cultural pathways that you're forced to go. And she forewent a university education to become a wife and a mother.
Hmm. So, I mean, the Italian immigrant experience is very familiar to me. And I think those that have been following along here on the podcast have heard us talk about it with a few other guests of Italian background. But what was it like growing up in the Hammer in the time that you did? Like that was, I would imagine, kind of the heyday too of Hamilton and in the steel industry and manufacturing.
It was like I went to high school in the 80s, right? So literally during that time, you could just graduate from high school and get a wonderful manufacturing job in Hamilton. And on
Mm,
that money, on that salary, you could raise a family, and
sure.
do it successfully. And so, the Stelco and DeFasco, which was the competing company, they're still there today. They would compete for labor and even non-skilled labor because they would train you
Mm,
to
mm,
become skilled labor at their respective manufacturing institutions. And those were two of the very popular manufacturing companies during that time. So there was that push and pull tension back then between whether or not you go to college, university, or right to the
mm,
workplace because you could get a very good job,
sure.
raising a family. That, of
So,
course, today is not the case, but
yeah, well,
back then you
sadly,
could.
sadly, it's not the case. Although, and maybe we can explore this. There are some trades that are going to be very well paying, and there's a massive shortage in them. And
Yes,
maybe we can
absolutely.
talk to connect education to that. But before we get there, because I do want to ask particularly about how when you have that pull of a really good job right out of high school, how you went a different path into education. But before we get there, what how did you in the 80s and like how did you play as a kid? What did that look like even before when you were young?
Yeah, typical Canadian kid from Ontario where I lived, breathed, and played hockey, with my buddies. I played ice hockey until I was 16 or 17. I quit too early. I should have kept on going, but peer pressure to do other things. And but I
Mm,
love hockey. I still love it to this day. I'm an avid and WHA hockey fan. But that's how we hung out. Just playing sports. And I was kind of one of those people that didn't really get into a lot of trouble. My parents were very strict, as I mentioned,
mm,
and back in those days. there was a certain kind of discipline that took place in the home that doesn't take place today without any
Mm-hmm.
social services knocking on your door,
Right.
if you know
Right.
what I mean.
Yeah, for sure.
My parents were very strict, so I always took the high road, and I really never got into any kind of trouble. I was pretty
Mm.
squeaky clean.
Did you guys play a lot of street hockey?
Oh yeah, street hockey. And back in those days, like you'd go play hockey somewhere else, and my mom would open up the back door to the kitchen and yell, David, time to come home for dinner. And that's what would happen. They would just let you loose on the streets because you weren't worried about, being abducted or getting into trouble. It was clean, safe, fun, and families took care of each other back in those days and looked out for all the children on the street, whether they were theirs or someone else's. So it was very safe, and that's the way we grew up.
Don't you find it kind of sad that you don't see the street hockey anymore? That's been the biggest difference in, I grew up in a suburb of Toronto, and that's all we did. And I get it that there's way more out there, but I find it really sad that you don't see it at all. I don't know, in your area, maybe it's different where you are, but
Yeah, it's rare. The social media and cell phone technology and the gamification of everything now. Kids are, as you know, down in their basements playing
mm-hmm,
Xbox or whatever
mm-hmm.
game console they might have. Yeah, the joy of just play as a youngster has dissipated quite a bit.
Yeah. Yeah. Or it's more like organized stuff that they do
Yeah,
now, competitive
exactly. Yeah,
sports. Yeah.
right.
Um, what was the first thing, and try to think as early on as you can, what was the first thing that you really loved learning?
Love learning. Well, it's funny. It's a funny question. My parents always pushed. My dad. My dad would always harp at the dinner table to my sister and I about how he had no money coming from Italy. My mother, the same thing, and that they had to fight and scrap and work hard. He didn't want
Mm-hmm.
my sister and I to have the same life as they did. So he was hell bent to make sure, and my mother, that we were going to go to university because he felt that pathway would get me a high paying job that
Mm.
I would be passionate about and enjoy. So, as a youngster going to school, it was funny. It was like school was just a place where I just went to go be with friends. It didn't really
Mm-hmm.
hit me, as a knucklehead male, didn't really hit me till about grade 7 or 8, where I said, well, what, school means something and I should start working harder and doing better. So I went from, if I looked at my elementary report cards, because there's no Italian, my mother has kept everything from, birth. There's a huge closet just full of
I think
art
it's an
stuff.
Abruzzese thing too, eh? My
Yeah.
mom still has it
Oh
all.
yeah.
Yeah.
Everything from kindergarten she has collected, and so I could probably go in the closet and find stuff I did back then. My marks, if I were to look, my marks from kindergarten to about grade 6 or C's, maybe B's if I was lucky. But a switch went off in about grade 7, and I started getting B's and A's, and I started enjoying going to school and understanding,
Mm.
quote unquote, how school works,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I might go with that philosophy later in our conversation as a father and instructing my kids on how to be successful in high school in particular, which I don't know if is a condemnation of high school or not, but I learned how school works, and I became a very successful student from that point on, right through to graduating high school.
Was there a particular subject around that age that caught your attention that you really thought like I love this. I can keep doing this.
It's funny you should ask that. It was music.
Hmm.
I got into, at that age, you hadn't hit puberty yet, so I had a high voice and I could sing. And so I never forget, his name is Mr. Hazelwood. He was the instrumental music teacher at the elementary school that I went to. And they did this test, an aptitude test for all students, I think at the end of grade 6, to see whether or not you'd be suitable for either their vocal or instrumental program, music program. And so I did it, and I passed with flying colors, and I ended up being both in the vocal and the instrumental music program. And as you know, there's a ton of research on singing and instrumental music and what it does to your cognitive development and how that helps in other subject areas. And I think my love and passion for music helped me in my other subject areas and helped me become a better student.
I love that. And I don't know if you have any great stories about music programs that we can get to, or doing any work in music in your district, but I really wish that we doubled down in every elementary school exactly for those reasons. You light up kids' brains in ways that you don't expect when they have a good music program, or an introduction to different instruments and the opportunity to play different instruments.
I was very privileged during that time. Full disclosure, I'm Roman Catholic. I've been in the Catholic education system ever since I started teaching in 1992. But as a kid, I didn't go to Catholic school. And here's that Italian protectionism from the mother, right? So all the kids on my street went to a public elementary school. The Catholic elementary school was too far for me to walk. So my mother wanted me to be protected. And so she sent me to the same school that all my friends went. So I ended up going to Shadok Public School in Hamilton, which is still there. And they had a great instrumental music program. And I ended up playing the tuba, if you can believe. And because I always loved the sense that it was either going to be the drums or the tuba, but a friend of mine wanted to play the drums. And so I deferred to him, and I chose the tuba, much to the displeasure of my parents when I came home, telling them that I'm going to be playing the tuba in grade 7 and 8. But I ended up really excelling at it. And it also got me into playing music on the piano, where I got up to grade 8 in the Royal Conservatory, and then I stopped playing at that point.
Yeah, I have a similar story with the trumpet.
Another brass instrument.
All I wanted to do was play guitar, and I got the trumpet. But okay, so now take me through into high school, and then like maybe slightly beyond, because I also have a similar story. I worked at a General Motors in Oshawa, the General Motors battery plant of all places. And I was a university student already at that time, but I remember one of the old grizzled vets on the line asked me, like, what are you studying? And I told him, English and philosophy. He looked at me, he's like, what are you going to do with that? You're better off staying on the line. And like, I mean, these guys at that time, this is I'd say late 90s, early 2000s, right? I think 99 and 2000 were the years I worked there. It really jarred me because they were making like $125,000 at that time. And more with overtime. And I remember thinking about it as like, could this guy be right? And I'm just doing these things, and eventually, I would have, by my calculation, had I stayed there, I would have lost my job at 36 because they had mass layoffs, and there were all the guys around my age that had started there. But I remember the appeal to it because it was like you put in an honest, hard day of work, and you got paid really well. These guys at the time had homes paid off. They had cottages. They seemed to live real decent lives. From my perspective, though, the battery plant, the assembly line was alienating. I said to myself, I would rather do anything but stay here, just because, I felt like a prisoner for those 8 hours a day, and I couldn't see myself doing that. What was that appeal to you like, being raised by factory workers, and having probably at the time very good opportunities to make good money out of high school?
Yeah, you can thank my father for that. He did not want me to be in that environment whatsoever, even though I kind of inquired. I ended up getting summer jobs at the old Fuller Brush company in Burlington, where my uncle used to be the general manager there. But Fuller Brush used to be like a very popular comb and brush company for all of Canada. I think it was the Canadian arm of the American corporate entity. But then I ended up working at St. Joe's Hospital as a porter, which was a fantastic job for a student. During that time, like in the 80s, I was making $15 an hour as a student. Back then, that was phenomenal money. That helped pay for my university, my teacher's college, and get a car.
Yeah. I mean, the minimum wage was probably like a couple bucks then, right?
It was, exactly. So I was getting paid like the full-time laborers. It was just part of the their contract. So I was lucky. So I had no need to go to Stelco to, get beat up and bruised and banged and brutalized with the heavy blue collar work that's required there. So, and then on top of that, my love for music, I didn't really think about going into the manufacturing sector. I had my mind set on going to university, and a lot of that had to do with my parents pushing me on a daily basis that no, you're not going to the workplace. You're not going to get your hands dirty. You're not going to get muck and mire in between your nails like your father.
Yeah.
You're going to get a white collar job and get a clean job and excel in whatever industry that happens to be down the road. So at the time, I was happy being a dedicated, hardworking high school student. I had good friends that we hung out with after school here and there to play sports, but I stuck to my studies and I continued playing the tuba and the piano all through high school, right up to grade 13.
And what did you then end up studying in university?
Well, see, then this is where the drama comes in. So this is where the 17-year-old male brain got me into more complications. So, once again, instead of, I think, being a leader and more of a follower, I kind of went against where my gut instinct was telling me, and that was going to go to Western, where I got accepted for basically a full scholarship on the tuba and the piano, 4 years. And I went to Mac for commerce because all my buddies went there. My parents were happy because they didn't want me to go away.
Right, of course. There's the Italians right there.
Exactly. And at the time, like this is what, 1986, 85. I said to myself at 17 years of age, what am I going to do with a music degree? Be a teacher? Be a teacher or go play in an orchestra? Am I going to make a lot of, a good living at that? I don't know. So because I really didn't get pushed, I broke the heart of my music teacher in high school. Like I only talked to me for several years after that. I had to make it up to her down the road. I always look back on those days and wonder what would happen because I went to commerce. I got a 4-year degree. I didn't do very well because I wasn't interested, right? Yeah. So I did well in the soft business courses like organizational behavior, marketing, advertising, kind of that had that creative bent to it, which kind of aligns with the music creativity. But things like finance and accounting, it was tough sledding.
Slog,
it was a slog. So I barely got through a 4-year degree. Most of my buddies failed out of commerce because it was so hard. And they ended up getting three-year degrees in like poli-sci or something else. I was one of the few that stuck it through because of my stubbornness, but it wasn't my passion. And at that time, I finished a degree and I didn't really know what I wanted to do when I graduated at that point.
And so how did you find your way into teaching? Because you seem pretty far from it here.
Yeah, I was thinking about the police force, the RCMP at that time. And then I started just tutoring students on music theory, if you can believe, and, early piano. And I started liking the fact that, I was teaching these kids how to become, better piano players and better at their theory. And that kind of led me to applying to Teachers College on a whim. And I didn't even apply to Ontario. I didn't even attempt. I had a couple relatives that applied to St. Bonaventure University in the States. And I said, I've got the money. I can pay for the tuition. I'll apply there. And I got in. And lo and behold, I finished Teachers College in the States, had to pass the very difficult National Teachers Exam, which is completely American content. There's no Canadian content. You had to know your American history, your geography. It was incredible. A lot of people failed that test numerous times. Some never passed it, never got their Teachers College certificate as a result. But luckily, I passed them the first time. Lord knows how. And I got my certification. I came back and eventually started teaching in the Halton area.
And what did you teach?
I started teaching business. And, when you're a first-time teacher, you take anything. So I got a schedule in high school, grade 9, teaching keyboarding. Remember that? Keyboarding?
I do, and I absolutely hated that class. I hated every moment
Yeah.
of keyboarding.
Yeah, I
Every moment.
don't blame you. Keyboarding, advanced English. Literally, I was a day ahead of the kids.
Well, now you're talking my language. I love that stuff.
And grade 9, open. It's considered open, but general religion.
Yeah.
And so that's what I had as my first docket of courses going into teaching. And man, I was green. It took a while, and that's how I started off. It was at
3 different areas your first year
three
teaching.
different areas.
That's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. So, you're still learning the subject content,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
Even with keyboarding, as mundane as that is, there's a science to teaching that and to trying to make it interesting and engaging for the kids. You just said
impossible.
How much you hated it.
Impossible.
Well, exactly. It's impossible. So anyway, with that, I really grew. It took me a couple of months, almost packed it in because it was tough. Because it turned out many of the students that I had during my first year ended up in a very specialized program the next year that the high school created for students with, we would call them now today, neurodivergent needs.
Sure.
But they weren't identified as such. And I'm going, what the heck's going on? Is it me? Or what's going? And so I really would busted my back trying to engage the kids, and with the help of my co-teachers and department heads, I got through. And then finally, when January, something clicked, and I had that resilience, and that set me up for the rest of my life. But the first couple of months, and this is what I tell new teachers all the time when I speak to them as a director, I share my story with them that I struggled and I almost quit. But you lean on your peers, you lean on your confidence, you lean on what you think is best, and you plug through. And the bottom line is it's about building relationships with the students, engaging them, trying to understand what their profile is. And if you're able to assimilate most of that, you'll get through it as a first-year teacher. And then you start getting better and building your confidence the more you do it.
Yeah, I don't think folks that haven't taught realize how intimidating and just objectively difficult those first few years of teaching are. In some ways, it's one of those things that you can't really be prepared for. I mean, practicums are great. They do a great job, I think, of getting you into the classroom. But once you're on your own, it's a real different experience. So tell me, how did you find your way into administration? Was that something too that was just serendipitous? Someone recommended it to you? Because obviously you've been very good at it. It's been your life's work. But why did administration appeal to you?
Well, once again, very privileged. I'll be honest. You've got that white privilege, right? You're a male, and right place, right time. I was a business teacher at Notre Dame. I moved from Loyola, St. Ignatius of Loyola Secondary in Oakville to Notre Dame Secondary School in Burlington, and I was teaching business about 4 or 5 years, 6 years, and then I was fortunate enough to become a business department head at a very young age. I wasn't even 30 yet. And I did that successfully for a couple of years. And then one day, and I mention this all the time, and he's since passed, but he's been the greatest influence in my life in education, a fellow by the name of Joe Luciani. He was my vice principal. And, when you walked into the Notre Dame offices, you'd have to go down this narrow hallway to pass the vice principal offices, right? And to get to your mailbox. And one day I walked by and Joe stuck his head out the door and said, "Hey, Davey, how you doing?" "That's not bad, Joe. How are you?" He goes, "You have your principal papers yet?" And I looked at him, and it was like someone hit me in the forehead with a mallet.
Like you never thought about it at all to this point?
Not in a million years, Jason. I was content on being a business department head for another God knows how many years. I was happy at that point. I didn't even think that I had the ability or the aptitude to even excel to that level at that point in my career. I was in my late 20s, right? And I said, no. He goes, well, Jesus Christ, Dave, go get him. Like, come on. You're going to be an administrator one day, and a good one. And that set the rest of my life. That conversation established a trajectory that got me into this seat today. That many years later, it was because of my relationship with Joe Luciani and him telling me, "I see you as a vice principal and a principal. You need to go get your qualifications." So I mention that all the time, anytime that anyone asks me. God bless his soul.
I love that. I think there are so many people or there's so many instances that just that moment of I see you, you give somebody a reflection on themselves that they haven't had. So being seen, I think if everybody'd have that opportunity, there would be all kinds of amazing stories like that one. Of just if enough folks and young kids have had mentors like that in their life to say, hey, I think you'd be great at whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a result of that conversation, I do it all the time. When I see excellence in front of me, and I see the characteristics that tell me that this person has the ability through lifelong learning and professional growth to one day become an excellent leader, I'm going to tell them. And I'm going to tell them right then and there, and tell them what they need to do and how to get to that point in their family dynamic. And as it turned out, Joe then ended up being my principal at St. Aquinas Catholic Secondary School in Oakville when I was his vice principal.
Oh, no way.
And that relationship really nurtured the leader who I became today. And it was a phenomenal time in my life. It was life-changing. It was a bellwether moment when I was his vice principal. And once again, forever grateful, because as I've said to many people, excellent leaders are an amalgamation of all the experiences that they've had during their life, whether who they worked under or alongside, who their leaders were. You learn from those experiences, and intuitively, I think the good leaders, grasp the brilliance of those people that they work with and kind of learn from their mistakes, so that when you become a leader, you're kind of like the fruition of all those experiences. Now, I'm far from perfect. I'm very infallible. I'm constantly trying to improve each and every day, even at my old age of 57. Self-awareness as a leader is crucial to be elite in that category. And but I can tell you that experience of working with Joe set the foundation for who I became as a leader today.
That's wonderful. Wonderful perspective on that. Can you tell us about some of the most inspiring things you've seen in schools and classrooms? You've been in, at least a few different districts and different areas.
Yeah.
What are the things that you saw that just moved you?
Well, once again, it's my career trajectory that kind of brought me to a realization that I had held a certain amount of biases as a secondary teacher, department head, vice principal, principal, assistant superintendent. My life has always been in secondary, right? And so as a result, I had this elitist, opinion about secondary vis-a-vis elementary, right? That, this is where the real learning takes place, right?
And you're fixing all the problems of the students that they didn't address in elementary school.
Exactly.
Yeah.
My mindset was wrong. I had it reversed. The eye-opening experiences for me as a leader was when I became a superintendent in Waterloo Catholic, where I had a family of schools. And for those that don't know what that means, as a superintendent, when you're assigned a family of schools, you're given a certain geographic area that has one or many high schools, depending on the size of the board, and their respective elementary schools that, quote unquote, feed into those high schools. Mm-hmm. So in Waterloo, at the Kitchener-Waterloo board, I was given the Cambridge family of schools, because at the time I lived in Burlington. So I had a couple of high schools and all the elementary schools therein. And what became profoundly illuminating to me was the dedication, the work ethic, the adaptability, the versatility, and the God-given patience of elementary teachers.
Mm. You just described my mother as an elementary school teacher, by the way.
Yeah, well, God bless her, because I don't know how they do it.
Yeah.
To me,
Yeah.
if you were to ask me, Dave, where would you place your best teachers? Well, I'd love to have all the best teachers and all the grades, but that's not a possibility. But if I had the ability to do that, I would place them in kindergarten and in grade 8.
Mm.
Because those are, to me, are the two most foundational, I would say, pathways for students in terms of their cognitive, social, and emotional development, in terms of their transition to secondary school.
Mm-hmm.
You see that poster that all you ever learn in life, you need to know, I'm paraphrasing, you learn in kindergarten.
Yeah.
Because it's true. And
It's true.
when you talk about powerful moments, it really hit me as a superintendent and as a director, where I would walk into kindergarten classes, and these beautiful little angels would come up to you with such inclusivity and inclusiveness,
Light in their eyes.
light in their eyes. The quote unquote world hasn't corrupted them yet.
Yeah.
They're just clay that you can mold, right? You think about the power that classroom teacher has, and in today's day and age in Ontario, you have early childhood educators in there as well, which is a brilliant strategy, because Lord knows you need as many staff members in a kindergarten class as possible.
Well, I'll say, I mean, to me, the single greatest government initiative action that I've ever seen in my life, and I'll die on this hill, is all day JK.
Right.
My kids were the first to go through that, and it was absolutely life-saving for me as a parent, and we know the outcomes are all better for all the kids. And anyway, I don't want to get on my soapbox.
Well,
here
it's funny you should
how we
say
need
that.
to.
Like I'll admit my bias. I'm a lifelong liberal,
Mm.
and that's a liberal strategy.
Absolutely,
And
yeah.
a fellow by the name of Charles Pascal was kind of considered one of the fathers of full day kindergarten. He lived over here in our area, Prince Edward County area. He just passed away a few years ago, unfortunately. But my point is, and I use this concept quite a bit when people ask me. It's called, and I forget where I heard it, but it's called the power of vulnerability. And I remember seeing it in a presentation where this presenter showed these huge, strong, big rugby players that were on the sidelines, and they were all crumbling and full of glee and happiness, because one of their cohorts had their baby son in their arms, and they were all cooing, and how we all do, scratch the belly, and they were like mountains of jello to this little baby. These huge masses of hulks of men that were moments ago killing each other on the pitch are now within the palm of this child's hand, and doing whatever the child asks them to do. And I draw that analogy because it hit me hard many times when I'm walking into a class and you're talking to the kids, and then all of a sudden, this little paw grabs the tip of your fingers, and you look down, and it's a child.
There's so much hope.
Oh man,
there's so much possibility.
It really is, and I'm sorry, it makes me emotional, but what that says to me, Jason, is that as a leader, you have a tremendous responsibility. One, to make sure that as a superintendent, as a director, you have to do your very best to develop a leadership program within your organization so that you have the very best principals and vice principals leading those schools, so that they can create a culture with their teaching and support staff in that school to ensure that the very best product is on that student's desk each and every day. We have a responsibility that is so profound. It doesn't matter how much we're being paid. It is a vocation. When you're an elementary teacher, the salary's great and they deserve every raise that they get. Same with secondary, anyone in education, because it's never been tougher to be in education today than it was especially when I was teaching and then my cohort before me. But my point is that we have a profound responsibility to mold that clay, our kindergarten kids, to build the foundation so that their cognitive development proceeds in a way where they're operating at a very high level in terms of their social emotional learning. So if they learn things like love and compassion and forgiveness and how to communicate appropriately, how to think logically, how to be creative thinkers, how to be able to discern information so that they can suss out the garbage from the truth. Because we live in a world today that is so acrimonious, so polarizing. These children are going to be walking into a world that society is going to be depending on them to right the ship, quote unquote. And it's not fair, but that's the reality. Your children are much younger than mine, and they're going to be part of that civilization that's going to hopefully make this world a much better place than it currently is. So I can't say how profound our job is as leaders to make sure that our children are getting the very best, and in my case, faith-filled education that they can, so that when they transition into secondary school, they're ready to take on that next challenge. And I'll just finish by saying that, I draw this corny analogy about a house, and I'll live to this day defending it. By the time a student gets from elementary into secondary, that house is built. The rooms are furnished, the walls are painted, the roof is on. The house is there, the foundation is there. All that secondary can do at this point is a renovation, repaint, knock out a wall, put on a new roof. If I'm making any sense, there's very little we can do comparatively to elementary in terms of that foundational establishment. We have to do and to make those renovations and those changes to that quote unquote house, that might be good enough to get them to graduate, to pass certain courses, to get a 55, to get a 60. It's very rare where you build a new home by the time they're in grade 9. So elementary is so fundamental to the success of our students. I don't think we take it that serious, and we should, because I think it's a profound experience for kids, grade kindergarten to grade 8 before they get to high school.
On that note, what would you suggest are the most important thing for parents to understand about, let's focus on elementary school, about their kids' entry into elementary?
Well, see, it's tough, and you probably see it too in your work. In elementary school, parents are still very much attached to their children, right? We have the saying, and we mean it with good faith, quote unquote, the umbilical cord is still not cut. The parents over advocate, getting extremely involved, either appropriately or not, because they have an emotional investment in their children, because at that age, the children can't really advocate for themselves. It's when only they get into high school that a large majority let the children grow and advocate for themselves, with the parents standing behind them, giving them support. What I would say for parents is that my best advice to you is just build relationships with the classroom teachers. Make sure that they understand how best to communicate to you, because teachers really do want to communicate and they want to know what the best way is. And usually they reach out to you and let you know how they communicate. It could be through email. It depends on board protocols, what they allow, what they don't allow. It could be through a newsletter. It could be through a phone call. But in any event, my best advice always is to build relationships with the classroom teacher, and to trust the teacher, and to really have conversations with your children on how school goes. And I know it's difficult in some cases. For example, boys, for example, they come home and say, "How was school?" "Oh, it was good," and that's all they say.
Good.
Well, girls talk, and it's just that dynamic in terms of their cognitive development at that age. It's tough to get a lot out of children, but it's about relationships and communication with the teacher that will ensure that the student is doing well in the class. Because sometimes you might never know as a parent that the child might be coming home happy every day, and they're not doing well in school at all, and they only find out at progress reports and midterm reports, and that might be too late. But usually, if you're dealing with a very good teacher, they're going to be in communication with you from the get-go. So all I would propose is make sure that the teacher knows exactly how to get in hold of you, no matter what, whenever and wherever, if it's in the best interest of the child, and that you're not bothering them, and that the communication lines are constantly open, because you want to work together in the best interests of the child. In a Catholic environment, what makes Catholic schools different, there's also that tripartite relationship where you have a relationship between home, school, and the parish. So we have a responsibility that not only is the parent involved, but also parish priests are involved in terms of the development of the child from a faith-based perspective. But that's what I would say. I know it sounds simple, but it's that relationship and open communication lines.
Yeah, and one day I want to do a podcast on the history of the Catholic education system in a few provinces, because I think there's an interesting legacy there. I was part of it, didn't particularly like it, but that's a story for another day.
Right.
But can I ask you this question? Most folks, because they've gone to school, there's a really unique dynamic that you as a leader and schools have to deal with in general, is that because everybody went to school, everybody thinks they can diagnose the problems and the challenges, right? Or they think it's just fine, or it's not hard like it was. It should be hard like it was back in my day. But can you help identify, from your perspective, what are the major challenges to the education system in Ontario?
Wow. That's a loaded question. I could come from many different angles on that one, my friend.
Yeah, well, actually, let me ask you to kind of hone it into a few very distinct things. Like, what do you think are the major ways, or let's start with, what are the major issues that you think are preventing us from building the system that we all know? You and I have been in the system for a long time. We know inquiry-based. We know more support for kindergarten students, you've mentioned, more support for EAs. So there's a number of things that you can point to, but what would you point to are the key issues that if we solve, we can really change the system like we know we should?
Well, as I mentioned, there's a number, but post-pandemic, what directors and superintendents and principals and teaching support staff have realized is that students coming to us are coming in higher frequency in terms of mental health issues. And many of it is due to perhaps family dynamics, economic situation at home as a result of the pandemic. Now, I know we're a couple of years out of that, but there's still threads. There's still part of that ether that lingers. And it's the whole socialization aspect of students. And where, if I had the money, if I was the Minister of Education and I wanted to put more supports, and they have been, but it's just not enough. It's around mental health supports, and as early as kindergarten, grade 1, grade 2, grade 3. And the only way you're going to do that is through adding more staff and funding a tremendous amount of professional learning to build the capacity of our teaching support staff. Now, a lot of boards are doing that, like our boards. We do trauma-informed capacity building, where staff understand, notice, see when a student has trauma, and are able to use mitigation strategies through social emotional learning to build them up. Because if the brain is not ready for learning, if you're in quote unquote red brain, as they say, a student is not going to be able to learn mathematics or English or anything else for that matter, because they're in fight and flight response, and you need to settle them down. So if anything, even more funding around mental health supports for our kids. And that's K to 12, to be honest, right through. And like I said, the only way you mitigate that is through more staff, more funding around capacity building and how to support. Because schools, Jason, today have become even more so than ever before. We're not just teaching students, right? We're psychoanalyzing them. We're providing social services. We're providing behavioral supports, providing speech language supports. It's almost like an all-in-one service that is taking place in our schools, and that's been, I think, constructed through kind of like a neoliberal agenda from the governments over time to try to get to maximize efficiency and productivity by having these services take place all at once in the school setting. In the olden days, kids would be parceled off to different areas.
To experts, right?
Experts, right?
Yeah.
So we're kind of doing almost everything. Now, we do bring in the medical profession and nurses and things like that, but more and more teachers and support staff are asked to be more than just educators, right? And that wears and tears on people.
Yeah.
And that's why one of the biggest costs to school boards has been sick leave, the sick leave entitlement, which has cost boards millions and millions of dollars that is underfunded by this government.
You know, a large portion of this audience would be here in part because of the work we did in the kind of mini series we did around mental health in schools. And all the professionals advocated for the very similar pieces that you are advocating for as well. So I'd like you, before we kind of end on a few maybe lighter questions, I want to give you the opportunity to talk about the real positive changes or initiatives you've been part of. So can you describe some of the most successful initiatives that you've seen, that you've been a part of, that you're proud of?
Well, yeah, it's an honor to echo some of those accomplishments because, as you know, I don't take individual responsibility for that. This is always a team effort, and I'm blessed with a tremendous senior team, board staff here that work night and day in the best interest of students. So we just finished our current 5-year strategic plan. And we're about to launch a new 5-year strategic plan in the fall. So we're just kind of developing that. Unfortunately, superintendents and directors work through the summer. we don't get a lot of summer off. We get a couple weeks, but you're essentially ending the school year strategic plan, and now you're ramping up. We're ramping up into a new strat plan in terms of the promotion and the launch and the knowledge mobilization, all that. But one of the proudest things, and there's many things I could articulate here, but in the interest of time, I'll just talk about one, and that's our Reaching Every Reader plan. Prior to the Ontario Human Rights Commission's Right to Read report, which I'm sure you know, where they tout the science of reading around structured literacy, things like vocabulary, reading comprehension, and They say that the science of reading is the way to go. Balanced literacy is not the way to go in terms of teaching and reading. Well, our staff saw the light before that report came out. So prior to the Ontario Human Rights Commission's Right to Read report on the necessity of teaching structured literacy, K-2 in particular, our speech pathologist came to us and said, Dave, we're launching the strat plan. We believe that under the achievement and innovation priority, that the science of reading, and we're going to call it the Reaching Every Reader plan, is the best way to go to right the ship around our literacy scores. Because at the time, our early development instrument data was telling us that kids were coming with deficits in areas that would contribute to their literacy deficits. And also our EQO scores weren't very strong at the time. and report card data wasn't strong around English and literacy. So they said the science of reading would right the ship. So I said, okay, I learned a lot about it. Our senior team learned a lot about it, and we integrated it into our plan. So we were actually 2 years ahead of the Right to Read report when doing that. And then as a result, we've been recognized by the Ontario Human Rights Commission as trailblazers in their most recent report in terms of our success, in terms of training all our staff, all our principals and vice principals around the science of reading, and really rooting that practice in our K-2 classrooms using the Acadian screening tool to monitor the progress. And so if I could highlight one accomplishment as a director that I'm most proud of, aside from all the faith development that we do, it would be our Reaching Every Reader plan and the success that we've had in really building the reading and writing skills of our youngest learners.
That's awesome stuff. That's really great stuff, and I'd love to hear that. My penultimate question for you today is, looking to the future of education, what are you hopeful for?
I'm hopeful that we continue down that pathway because if you looked at my curriculum vitae, as we talked earlier, I'm the chair of the English Catholic Council of Directors of Education. I was the chair of the Council of Directors of Education. So that's all 73 school boards across the province of Ontario. And working with those fantastic directors, I think we all stand together, whether we're public, Catholic, French, public, French, Catholic, in one mode where we hope that the students that we graduate will transform this world and transform it in a way by infusing more love, more empathy, more compassion, more innovation, more creativity, more entrepreneurialism to find ways to protect the planet, but at the same time, make life more enjoyable, more happy, and more productive for the citizens of the world. And I have the utmost optimism and confidence that that's the trajectory of where we'll continue to go. And I have faith that our education system will continue to do that for years to come.
Wonderful. And my last question always is, what book, movie, video, podcast, or music album, maybe music album in this one, have you enjoyed recently that you would recommend to the audience?
Well, I could cite several books, but one podcast that I've been really listening to quite a bit is The Bridge by Peter Mansbridge.
Oh, wonderful.
I don't know if you recall who Peter Mansbridge is, right?
His voice is etched in my childhood memory for sure.
Yeah, you're not a Canadian if you don't know who Peter Mansbridge is.
Well, you're not a Canadian of our vintage if you don't know.
Perhaps, yes. Yes, thanks for the correction.
Yeah.
Anyway, he's got a podcast called The Bridge on Sirius Radio under Candid Talks. And so he does shows Monday to Friday. And each day of the week, it's a different person. But on the Fridays, in particular, he does a podcast with Chantal Hébert, and usually it's Bruce Anderson or someone else, and they talk about politics. And if you want to stay informed around geopolitics around the world, I would strongly recommend that you listen to The Bridge at least on Fridays through Canada Talks on Sirius Radio, because that's where I get all my up-to-date information on international politics, and it keeps me informed.
With that, David DeSantis, thank you for joining us.
It was my honor and pleasure. Thank you.
This podcast is recorded on the territory and Treaty 13 lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and on the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat and the Haudenosaunee. The show is edited and produced by the marvelous and talented Andrew Mastroianni. If you like what you're hearing, make sure you subscribe to us on Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcast. Until next time, remember, there's absolutely no inevitability as long as there's a willingness to contemplate what's happening. I'm your host, Jason Bucheri. Until next time.